Please get out of here. So that those two little boys that are new that were running around, that's William and Henry, and those are the sons of Max and Sarah, who Max will be speaking today. And what I loved about them running around was they sat down for the first song and watched the other kids go around, and then it was like they had been bottling up energy the entire time, and then proceeded to last the entire time. They were non-stop. That was hilarious. So today, Max, my cousin Max, is going to be speaking, and I had asked him to speak a couple days ago. I thought he was leaving on Tuesday, and he spoke last year when he came, and so that means you guys make this Sunday or not at all. So he accepted on somewhat last minute, but I don't know if you guys saw my post on Facebook. I was able to go golfing with Matt, Max, and Michael Tim, and Max has played a very important part in my life, a role in my life as just a really good friend, and I think it's interesting how that's just a special bond growing up with cousins, and then how that really is the type of bond I think that just really lasts a lifetime. And I probably spent more time during the summer at their house than I did at my home. And Max and I would go. Well, Max would go weeks and weeks and weeks on end without taking a bath. When we were young, and
still do.
Yes, and he is the one that there are pictures out there that we do not ever want to be released of us when we were young kids. That's enough said. But I just very happy where proud of him what he is in his life, and he's a California IAN, but lives out in California. He's a professor out there, and just really proud of him. So I wanted to, if we could all give him a warm spring of life welcome.
So thank you for having me. I know you didn't have any choice in the matter, but thanks to Lee for inviting me. I really enjoyed my time last year. And it was a little short notice, but I had a suspicion I might come back and speak. And I speak on a pretty regular basis at work. I'm used to a captive audience. They can't leave without getting in trouble. So you guys won't get in trouble if you leave, I don't think, but I'll see you and think bad thoughts. So thank you. That's not true. That's a joke. So thank you for being here and for listening. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is adversity and how we face adversity and sort of what we do when we're faced with things that we wouldn't prefer. Often in life we do go through seasons, just like we do right now. It's hot, it's humid. That's one of the main reasons I agreed to speak today was there was air conditioning in here. There's not air conditioning in here. Staying in my parents' house. This is really comfortable. But in all seriousness, I mean, we do go through seasons in life where sometimes things are they're rolling. They're going well. I'm kind of experiencing one of those right now. The adversities that I am facing are things like I'm annoyed with people at work because they keep emailing me when I'm on vacation. Really, that's not a very horrible thing if you think about it in the grand scheme of things. The housing market in San Diego, house prices are really expensive. That's irritating. But really, if you think about it, again, in the grand scheme of things, it's not too bad. The season that I'm in is one that's quite good. You may be in a season like that as well, or you may not. There are times in life where things just don't go well. They don't go as we would prefer. I have a colleague at work she has a son who's about my youngest son's age. He's 2.5 or so. And she and her husband were pregnant with their second. They were expecting a daughter. And she went in to give birth. And everything had gone well up until that point in the pregnancy. The probably 3 days beforehand, she had a checkup and things were fine. The baby was fine. And when she gave birth, it was a stillbirth. I mean, the baby came out and was not alive. And totally out of nowhere, totally unexpected. These are, very, very faithful, strong believers who are dedicating their lives to the cause of Christ in Christian higher education. And their baby's dead. And so when I think about the housing market being irritating in San Diego, that the house I have is not, big enough or doesn't have enough windows, it doesn't seem so bad. It seems a little petty, if you think about it. But we all go through seasons in life. There are times when things are going to be really terrible for me, and I don't know when those are coming, and I hope they stay away for a long time. But important people in my life are going to die at some point, and bad things are going to happen. And this is just part of life. But a big question is, what the heck? Why? Why do things have to be this way? Because you would think this God that we worship, who is all powerful and perfect and all knowing, could come up with a better way than that. But that's not what happens. And so the question is why, why is that? And more importantly, what should we do? What should our response be? Both in the good seasons and the bad ones, because those are things that are just going to come. So I have my notes on my phone. Believe me, I'm not texting or Snapchatting or searching for Pokemon, whatever you may do on your phones. I'm just checking my notes here, so please excuse me. But what I'd like to talk about today is, like I said, what do we do when we face adversity in the first place? And the scripture that I'll be focusing on is the entire book of Job, which I'll now read. It's 42 chapters. I hope you are ready for that. Joking, of course. I do tend to take a big picture when I think about scripture. People have different approaches when they think about scripture, when they think about sermons. Many people are very detail-oriented. That is not me. I don't care about details at all. I'm very much more of a big picture kind of person. And that can be both good and bad in that, I might not notice when Sarah hangs a new picture on the wall for 6 months. When did we get that? I'll say, and she'll say that's been there for 2 years. And I'll say, oh, because I just don't typically focus on the details. So when I talk about scripture today, I want to talk about Job as a body of literature, as a work. This is even by people who are not Christians. There are many scholars out there who study the Bible and study ancient texts. And Job is considered to be one of the greatest works of literature in all of history, even by atheists, the entire book. And I'm not an atheist, and I also think that it is a great work of literature, but also a great work of God's message to us. And I think there are some very interesting things in there, but there are some things in there, honestly, that are quite scary that we have to think about. Not everything in the Bible is pretty and neat and nice. And Job is one of those things. Some bad things happen to Job. And I'm going to talk to you about that in a little bit here. But before I do, what I'd like to do just briefly, and this is something that I hate it when pastors do it when I am sitting in your place, which I guess I don't know why I'm doing that now. Maybe it's a useful thing, but I'm going to make you talk to a neighbor. I hate that. I don't like talking to neighbors during church. I like to sit there and listen, and that's it. And but what I'd like you to do is just consider for a moment what sort of season that you might be in your life. Are you in a difficult season? Are you somewhere in the middle? Are you in an easy season? And no matter where you are, I'd like you to share, if you're comfortable, an adversity or two that you might be facing in your life right now. Something small, something big, whatever you'd like your neighbor to know. And the reason why I do this is because when you're part of a community, knowing each other's struggles is probably the most important thing that you can do for one another. Because what's the point of being part of a community if you don't know each other and know what you're going through? So if you would, turn to a person next to you. You can certainly have a group of 3 if you would prefer. But turn to a person next to you. A group of 1 probably won't work. But turn to a person next to you and talk about what season in life you're in right now and what sort of adversities you might be facing. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So go ahead and talk for a moment. So if you haven't already, go ahead and take just another moment to finish up, and then I'll talk your ear off for a little bit. All right, so if you would, I'd like to tell you about a few things that I have researched, things that I have observed out in the world. One of the things that I do in my everyday life, I'm a social psychologist, which means that I'm not the type of psychologist that goes about doing counseling with people. I do research mostly, and I research the ways that people impact each other, the way that our behavior influences the behavior of other people. And the type of social psychology that I do is aimed at influencing behavior for good. So in other words, some social psychologists, what they do is they work for marketing departments, for example. So you might want to help a company design an advertising campaign that would sell products. Other social psychologists, most in fact, are aimed at alleviating problems in the world. So many research things like stereotyping and prejudice. They try to figure out where those things come from, what we can do to alleviate them. The types of things that I typically think about are how do we alleviate things like poverty, for example. And so I want to tell you about some people who almost undoubtedly have it worse than you. And I do that for a specific reason. It's not to say that your problems are not important, because I think that they are. I think that they're very important. And I'm going to tell you why I think that in a little bit. But first, I do want to share with you some of the problems that people out there face that we here in the United States just often do not. But here in the United States, there are people probably who suffer quite a bit more than anyone in this congregation on a day-to-day basis. Now, that might not be true, but let me just tell you some of the things that are out there that you may not know about. So the first thing I want to tell you about, I want to give you a few stats on homelessness here in the United States. It's difficult to do a census of homeless people. It's very difficult to figure out how many homeless people there are because you can't go door to door very easily because they don't have doors. That's the thing. And it sounds a little like I'm trying to make a joke there, but I'm not. They literally do not have doors. You cannot do a census very easily. And so by best estimates, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.5 million homeless people in the United States at any given time. So that's a big number. It turns out that people have trouble really considering what numbers that large actually are, what they mean. So to give you a frame of reference, 3.5 million people is the population of Wyoming, Vermont, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Alaska combined. So that would be like if a natural disaster wiped out the homes of everyone in 5 states in the United States. That's how many homeless people there are in the U.S. today. Of those 3.5 million people, 1.5 million are children. So a lot of times it's easy for us to blame homeless people for being homeless because of the choices that they make. So maybe they are addicted to drugs, for example, and so that's why they're homeless. Those kids, those 1.5 million kids, probably not addicted to drugs at this point in their life. They may be at some point, but right then when they're kids, I would guess probably not. Other thing about homeless people, 25 to 33%, based on estimates, have mental illnesses, serious mental illnesses. So many of them should actually be in the hospital rather than on the street. And that's one reason maybe why they are on the street, is because they have a disease. in many cases. Of that population, 60,000 are veterans of the U.S. military, meaning that they, went and served our country, perhaps in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam, and they are homeless today. Maybe because they have post-traumatic stress disorder. That's another mental illness that people sometimes get when they face trauma. And so those people have it worse than me. And you're the only one who can say whether they have it worse than you, but I know for me, they have it worse than I do. And they have it worse than I do by a lot. Now, like I said, that doesn't mean my problems are meaningless, but it does mean that there are problems out there that are worse than mine. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why I think it's really important to remember, though, that doesn't mean that our problems are meaningless. It's just to say that there are some major problems out there, and that's in the United States. If you would, if you can turn to the person next to you, or perhaps on your own, see if you can find the label on the shirt that you're wearing or the pants that you're wearing. See if you can see where that's made. If you can't, that's okay. If you'd rather not have someone looking down your shirt, that's okay too. But I'll tell you, if you want to take a chance and just take a look, if you can just look at the collar or have someone do that, usually there's a label right there. Just take a look and see if you can see where your clothes are made. Does anybody see a country? If you could just yell it out. Bangladesh. Excellent. Nicaragua. Interesting. Not many clothes are made in Nicaragua, actually. Yeah. El Salvador. Honduras. So we've got a lot of Central American countries here. Pardon? Kenya. Sri Lanka. Most likely, in all those places, your clothes were made by children. I don't want to be a downer, but that's the truth. They were probably made by children. If not, they were made by people who are paid certainly cents on the hour. And generally, we have ways that we try to justify those things. And we say, well, the typical wage in those countries is quite low, and so it's fine that we pay the people in Bangladesh 10 cents an hour to make our clothes, because otherwise, if we paid them more, that would just mess up their economy. And maybe, I don't know. I'm not an economist, psychologist, like I said. But that seems low to me. It also seems maybe wrong to have kids make my clothes. And believe me, I have been aware of this issue for a long time. I'm sure you've heard of sweatshops. That's where our clothes are typically made, especially clothes made in certain countries. If your clothes are made in Egypt, Uzbekistan, China, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, or Thailand, especially those countries, they were undoubtedly made by child labor. Sometimes kids as young as 5 in many cases. So those kids that we had running around here, they're well on their way to making our clothes. And they don't get paid much, sometimes not at all. They don't go to school, and they work in unsafe working conditions. In fact, the U.S. government defines child labor as either kids that are too young, they are paid too little, or they're in unsafe working conditions. So any of those things are possible. And unfortunately, something like 90% of our clothes are made by people in those conditions. And it's cheap. That's why you can buy. I bought this shirt at Costco for. It was on sale. It was $14.99. It's a nice shirt. This is my work shirt. I have several. My students make fun of me because I have the same shirt in like 6 different colors, because it's all from Costco. But they're all from Bangladesh. I've tried to buy shirts that are not made in Bangladesh, that are made elsewhere, and I can't find them. I'd have to make my own shirts. Nobody wants that. End up with one arm, down here, another one over there. So those kids have it a lot worse than we do. Does anybody like chocolate? Yeah. Your chocolate's picked by kids. Yeah, chocolate's made from cocoa beans. The largest producer of cocoa beans in the United States, or around the world, is not actually a U.S. company, even though U.S. companies typically make our chocolate. If you have Hershey's or Mars or M&M or whatever it might be. Our chocolate comes, 70% of it, cocoa beans, come from West Africa. And the 2 countries in West Africa that produce 70% of our chocolate are Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And those industries are not very well regulated. The average chocolate farmer or cocoa plantation owner earns about $2 a day. That's the owner, $2 a day. And so their margins are so thin that they need child labor. Now, the average kid who picks our cocoa beans is between 12 and 16 years of age. So, you know, we have kids who make our fast food who are that age, and we wouldn't consider that necessarily a problem. The thing is, these kids don't get to go to school. On these plantations, they have also been found that kids, again, as young as 5, are picking our cocoa. And I should also mention that the primary job of these kids is to climb up a tree with a machete in one hand. So they're climbing up a tree one-handed with a machete, chopping down giant cocoa pods. The beans come in pods about this big. And then they fall to the ground, and other kids then use a machete that you kind of jab it into this big cocoa pod and have to pry it open to get out the cocoa that's inside. And these are kids, again, between the ages of 12 and 16 typically, but as young as 5. And so these kids, again, like I said, they don't go to school. These are the kids who have it better off, because sometimes in order to save money, to cut costs, this is actually a documented thing, we know this is happening, the plantation owners will go into other countries, neighboring countries, countries like ones that you maybe have never heard of, countries like Burkina Faso, for example. Very small, very poor countries. And they will actually steal children to come and work at the plantation. So we're not just talking about child labor, we're actually talking about human trafficking and child slavery. So every time you eat, unfortunately, a Snickers bar, that chocolate has undoubtedly been picked by a child. That's not good. And so the question is, what do we do about that for many people? And the answer is, I'm a psychologist, I have no idea. Not an economist. But I can tell you that if you just stop buying chocolate, that might make you feel a little better. You can buy fair trade chocolate. If you ever see something that's fair trade certified, it's like $800. Typically, you know, it's like $5 typically for a bar of chocolate instead of 50 cents for a Hershey's bar or whatever they go for these days. It's not a nickel anymore. But it's more expensive. So you can do that to make yourself feel better. That chocolate is generally picked by good sources. But if you just stop buying chocolate, the economy in those countries would actually take a big hit. And so then where do those kids go? There isn't the infrastructure for them to go to school. There's no simple solution. So this isn't me saying, you know, stop wearing clothes and eating chocolate. That's not it. This is me saying people have it a lot worse than I do. And I don't know if people have it worse than you do, but they have it a lot worse than I do. And again, this leads to the bigger question. Because like I said, the details for me are less important. The bigger question is, what the heck is God doing in this world, allowing these sorts of things to happen? Unfortunately, I feel complicit in these things. I feel responsible when I do buy chocolate or when I do buy a shirt, because I do know that I am supporting those industries. And you may not feel that way, and that's okay. But that's how I feel. And so I don't really know what to do about that in many cases. I buy a lot of my clothes used. Or just use them for a very long time. Part of that's just because I'm cheap. Sarah and I, we really have pretty much stopped eating chocolate when possible. We'll buy it from Costco. Costco reports, I don't know if it's true, they report that they buy their chocolate from responsible plantation owners. And I don't know if that's the case. I sound like a Costco advertisement now, but that's not my point. But again, the larger point is, what kind of world is this, that these things are happening and that we are complicit in all these things, not even knowing it? And there's so much more things that are like this. I won't tell you them all because I don't want to make you feel terrible. Just to give you a sneak preview though, if you've ever enjoyed fireworks made by children, if you have bricks in your home, children, if you like coffee, again, typically children. Yeah. And you can buy fair trade coffee. It just costs a lot more. And so the question is, you know, when we're talking about this issue as what can I do about it, the question is that extra cost, A, something you can afford, and B, is it worth it for you to, you know, to support those causes? For me, it is when I can afford it. And sometimes you just can't. I can't tailor make all my clothes. I do not make that much money. I literally cannot do that. So you can only do what you can do. We live in a very broken world. Again, the bigger question is why? Why is God allowing this world to be like this? And a bigger question is God even allowing it? Is Satan winning? Is it people who are doing this? Is Satan even involved? Because people are pretty terrible sometimes if you watch what they do. These are big questions. These are questions that people have grappled with for thousands of years. This is the story of Job. The whole story of Job is about these questions. Why do bad things happen to people who don't deserve them? And that's the story of Job. And I'm going to get to Job in just a minute, but just to finish, just so you know this issue, in terms of child labor, a conservative estimate is that there are 170 million children involved in child labor around the world. Now, just for a frame of reference, that is over half the population of the United States. Children around the world, 11%, 1 in 10 children around the world is involved in child labor. That is, they are forced to work without going to school. They are forced to work for either low pay or no pay. They are forced to work in unsafe working conditions. 1 in 10 children. These kids have it a lot worse than I do. But again, that doesn't mean that my problems are worthless. It just means that there are major, major problems out there. So the reason why I keep emphasizing that our problems are not worthless, to me, is illustrated by rats, believe it or not. So this is one thing that psychologists do. We study rats to get insights into people. The reason why is because rat brains and human brains are not actually all that different. We have some extra stuff in our brains. You notice a rat brain is like this big, and a human brain, you know, bigger, hopefully. But even though some people don't seem like they have a bigger brain, I assure you they are typically bigger than that. But we have some extra structures. We have something called a prefrontal cortex in our brains that rats don't. This is what allows for things like critical thinking. Rats don't, they don't think critically. They mostly just look for food and ways to annoy people, I think. That's what it seems like. But some researchers a long time ago wondered what would happen if you surprised a rat. So what they did was they took 2 groups of rats and they took this group over here and they gave them sugar water. Rats love sugar water. People would never like sugar water. It's got to be carbonated if we're going to like sugar water. So rats love sugar water, and they gave them a solution that was 13% water. I mean, 13% sugar and 87% water. So there's quite a bit of sugar in this sugar water, and they could have as much of this water as they wanted, as long as they were pressing a lever. So every time they pressed the lever, the water would become available. So really quickly, the rats, they love to press that lever. It's like their favorite thing. It's like that's their job, and their job is their favorite thing in the whole world. So every time they do that, they get this sugar water, and eventually they're trained that all they have to do to get their treat is to press the lever. Then they change it. They change the solution of the water. They change it to 7% sugar. So it goes down from 13 to 7. The rats stop pressing the lever. They hate it. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to them in their whole lives. It's over. They quit their job. They storm out. No more. Done. So that's group A over here. Group B starts out at 3% sugar water, and they learn to press the lever. And they do it, because 3% is better than regular water. And then they change it after they learn to press the lever. They change it to 7%. The rats, they got a raise. It's the best day of their life. They press the lever like crazy. What you notice, though, 7%. They love it. 7%. It's the worst day of their life. We only know what we know. And so when I have a bad day, it's not because someone has abducted me and taken me into slavery to harvest cocoa with a machete. That doesn't mean my problems are meaningless. I only know what I know. And we're like the rich rats over here, the 13% that goes down to 7%. We are rich rats. And when our problems get bad, they still feel bad. That's real. Those bad feelings are very real. But they're not as bad as the 3% rats over here. Their problems are also very real, and they're more real than ours. But the point is, they're both real problems. We only know what we know. my son, William, the worst day of his life is if Netflix doesn't work. That's the worst day of his life. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen. Can't watch cartoons for as long as humanly possible. When you're an adult, you know that that's not so bad. In fact, it's maybe quiet. So maybe that's even a good thing. We only know what we know. And it really legitimately feels horrible for him if that happens. So I think, again, the thing that I'm trying to say here is we can't discount each other's problems just because somebody's got problems that are worse than mine or somebody's problems are not as bad as mine. We just don't know what other people's internal experiences are like. So if you feel like you're having a bad day, you are legitimately having a bad day, even if my day is a lot worse, in my opinion. So my point is not that we shouldn't feel bad when we face adversity, because our adversity is real for us. It very much is our adversity. And if someone says to you, well, just think about the children in Africa, you shouldn't be suffering right now, this is fine, you're fine. You're not fine, and that's okay. They're not fine either. That's another problem that needs to be addressed. And I'm just going to let that sort of sit with you about the chocolate and clothes and bricks and fireworks and all that stuff. That problem needs to be fixed. But that is a societal issue. That's not a you issue so much. I think there are things that you can do, but I'll leave that to you to figure that out. But the point is, your problems are real problems. My problems are real problems. And don't let anyone take that away from you. We feel what we feel, and that's a real thing. So I want to talk to you now, though, about Job, because apparently during a sermon, you're supposed to talk about the Bible. And I haven't done that yet. I've been talking about psychology and social issues. So I want to talk to you about Job. I joked about reading the whole book of Job. I'm not going to do that. But I am going to kind of give you an overview by reading some of the, what I think are some of the key pieces. So I'm going to start with Job 1:1. If you want to turn there, you can, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. And I'm reading from the English Standard Version. So if you have the NIV, it may look slightly different. So the beginning of Job is sort of built to set up that Job is a really righteous and upstanding person, but also Job is literally the richest person in his hemisphere. So Job, we're not talking about some guy who's doing pretty well. We're talking about Bill Gates. And that's reality. That's the truth. And I'll show you why. I'll read this passage. I'll give you some numbers there after. So Job 1:1 says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. So I'm going to stop there for just a moment. It goes on to talk about Job's kids. And Job's kids used to have a lot of parties for their family, sort of like family parties. And Job would come, and he would pray for them, and he would make sure that they were upright and upstanding. The passage just says that to illustrate Job is a really, not just a good guy, not just a wealthy guy. He's a righteous person. And the reason why we know Job is so wealthy, it literally says, so that this man was the greatest of all people in the East. The East is that's like, the Middle East, that was the seat of the world at the time. The greatest person. And that means something. So having 7,000 sheep. Anybody know the price of sheep today? Just out of curiosity? $50, let's say. I saw an analysis. Somebody said this livestock would have been worth over $5 million. Just the livestock. So he's got a number of servants. During slavery in the United States, in today's dollars, the average slave was worth $50,000, and it says he has many servants. I can't imagine how much land you would need to support all those animals. He must have had just an absolute ton of it. Having sons and daughters was a really important thing in that society as well. So he had 10, and that at the time would have been seen as a really, really good thing. And again, he was righteous. So the greatest person in the whole East. So later, this is Job 1:6 now. It says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. That leads to so many questions for me. I don't know if that leads to questions for you. Who are the sons of God? Who is that? I don't know.
And Satan just shows up? Like, did he crash the party? Was he invited? How did he get there? Anyway, the Lord said to Satan, not surprised, he's just like, hey, Satan, what's up? From where have you come? Where have you been? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it. So Satan's just been hanging out on earth, not up wherever God was. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? So God suggests to Satan, hey, have you thought about picking on Job recently? You thought about that? Think that might be a good idea? What? Then Satan answered the Lord and says, does Job fear God for no reason? So Satan says, of course Job is upright. Of course he's righteous. He's the richest person on earth. Satan says, have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So God says, I'm not going to do it, but if you want to, go ahead and take away everything he has, but just don't mess with his person. Like, don't mess with his body, himself. Don't kill him. That's a weird contest. Anybody want to be part of that today? So again, my point here, these are big questions that unfortunately the book never really goes on to answer all that well. Like, what the heck is going on? So anyway, I'm not going to read the next part of the passage, but the gist of it is Satan kills all Job's kids, but it doesn't say Satan, actually. What it specifically says is it was a windstorm, I think. Yep, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. I alone have escaped to tell you, as a servant talking. So a windstorm comes, blows down the whole house. They're all dead. Again, that leads to some questions for me. Like, did Satan initiate that windstorm? Was that a natural disaster? Where did that come from? I don't really know. These are hard questions. And the book doesn't answer it. I mean, it doesn't say Satan made a windstorm. It says a windstorm came. So this leads to questions like, when bad things happen, when natural disasters happen, if you remember that tsunami from 2004, I think it was, Christmas time, killed hundreds of thousands of people. Was that Satan? Was that a natural disaster that just is part of our broken world? I don't know. And I'm not here to give you answers to that question, because I don't think anyone can actually give you an answer for it. I don't think it's in the Bible. And I think anybody who might claim to give you an answer is probably grabbing at straws, because it's not there. But again, the point is, when we face adversity, adversity can be very real. It can be a lot more real than it is in my own life right now. And so one of the big questions is, how do we respond? What should we do when we face that sort of adversity? And so this is the whole rest of the book of Job. This is, we haven't even gotten to the second chapter yet. So Job, at the end of this, he gets attacked by two separate groups, the Sabaeans and then the Chaldeans. They come and they burn down his fields. They take off with all his animals. Job is upset, but not upset with God. At the end of the first book, Job said, or the first chapter, Job says, Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped after all this has happened. That would not be me. I'm not going to make any illusions that I'm a wonderful person. That would not be me. I would curse God. I really would at that point. I can be pretty sure about that. And I feel like I'm a very faithful person in life. But I couldn't do it, I don't think. And it says, his quote is, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That's that song. If you know that song, blessed be your name, that's about Job. And that's about a guy whose family is all dead and his wealth is gone. And he's still saying, blessed be your name. That's not me. That's not who I am. I would love to be that, but I'm not. And then it finishes with, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. So we know Job didn't do anything wrong here. Later in chapter 2, Satan comes and he does actually mess with Job. In this case, it does, I think, say that it's Satan. And he gets boils all over his whole body. You ever gotten bitten by a horsefly like one time? It's like the worst thing that could possibly happen to you while you're outside. He's got him all over his whole body, and his response is to go sit in ashes and scrape himself with a broken pot. And he wishes he was dead at that point, but he still doesn't curse God. His wife tells him, she's still alive, his wife tells him, why don't you just give up and die, and before you do, curse God? And he says, no, I'm not going to do that, although I do wish I was dead. So Job has been through some very serious adversity. And the rest of the book, the remaining essentially 40 chapters, are Job and Job's friends grappling with why this happened to him. And there can be a variety of reasons. There are a variety of reasons for why we think of suffering, why we think that suffering or adversity may happen. Some people would say that it's Satan who is tormenting us. Maybe. I don't know. I don't see that side of things. It's invisible. It's difficult to know. Maybe. Some people say it's because you deserve it for some reason. It's because of something you've done. In fact, that's Job's friends, his friends. That's what they say. They say, you are bad, actually. And in fact, one of them says, you actually deserve worse. You didn't get what was actually coming to you. I don't know if you've ever been in a circumstance like that when you turn to a friend for comfort and they do not comfort you. They give you the opposite. I think in general, people are typically pretty well-meaning. But that lesson that I take from that specific thing is when someone comes to you needing comfort, make sure you don't blame them for whatever it is that they are going through. Just be there with them in that time. That's all Job needed, I think, was somebody to be there with him. And there was nobody. Everybody's fighting about why this happened to him. And usually it would turn around and it would be his fault. Another interpretation of why these things happen to Job, scholars and others have debated about this through history, is because of that contest at the beginning, that all of this was to demonstrate that God is the one who's in charge and God is the one who is all-powerful. Maybe that's what it was all about, but you notice that there are some things in there that suggested it wasn't actually anything other than natural disasters that were doing this to Job. So he gets attacked by a group of people, not a group of demons. He gets his house or his son's house blown down by a windstorm, not by, again, Satan or a group of demons. And so I do wonder, was this just Job having a really poor run of luck? Remember those seasons that I mentioned before? He was in a great season to begin. And then everything changed very quickly. And that's how it happens often for people, is things change for good and for bad. Sometimes when you're in that low place, everything just turns around. Sometimes when you're in that high place, everything turns around in the opposite direction. And I wonder, is that what happened with Job? And I don't think there's anything conclusive in the book of Job that tells us one way or the other. Is it the contest? Is the contest illustrating the way that things happen in the world just because the world is a broken place? I don't know. Because God comes in at the end of the book of Job, and he says to Job, basically, you don't know anything, dummy. And the implication there might be, you don't know anything, I'm doing this for a greater purpose. Or it might be, you don't know anything, this is the world that we live in, and I'm trying to make things better where there are opportunities to do so. I don't know. It doesn't say. Maybe you've heard this. When something bad happens to you, someone might say to you, well, it's a good thing that you know that God will use this for good. I can't imagine saying that to my friend at work whose daughter died in birth. That I can't, you're lucky, Catherine, because God will use this for good. How about no? How about pick on somebody else? That's our reaction as people. Maybe God will use it for good. I don't know. Again, I'm not privy to that information. But I know that telling someone that in that moment, it's not the right thing to say, because they need to be lived with and walked with and carried for years, because that's not something you get over. And that's not something that's saying, you know what, don't worry about it. In the end, it's a wash. Things will turn out, fine. For other people, not for you. For you, it sucks. It's bad. But for other people, it'd be good. So again, even if that is what's going on, even if it is the plan for God to use that for good, I don't like to throw that in people's faces, and I would encourage you not to do that as well, because often that's not what that's not only is it not what people need to hear. I don't think that that's the loving thing to do in those cases, even if it is true. Sometimes speaking the truth is not loving. Sometimes the truth can be said it can be kept to yourself. If someone is very, let's say your wife comes to you and says, "Does my butt look big in this dress?" I don't know. What do you think? No. Yeah, it does. Actually, it does. That's not the thing to say, is it? Is it, Sarah? That's not what you want to hear. Even if it's true, you don't want to hear it. And it's not the loving thing to say either. Maybe, "I love you," and then just run. But so the point is that even if it is the case that God is going to make good from all of this, we don't need to throw that in people's faces, and we don't know how God works. We just don't, and that's a hard thing to live with. If somebody says to you, "Why did this happen to me?" to say, "I don't know." It doesn't feel that comforting typically. But that often is maybe the more accurate answer. So what I want to talk to you about last year, I've been, you don't know, but I've sort of divided things into 3 parts. And my third part is back to psychology again. It's about a concept called grit. Grit is something that's been investigated recently in psychology, spurred on by a woman named Angela Duckworth. Very good researcher. But grit, the idea of it is embodied in one of Randy Hotchkiss's favorite quotes. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight and the dog that matters. That's grit. And I was curious where that quote came from. I had to do quite a bit of research. Apparently it's been misattributed to Mark Twain, the famous author, Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, that sort of thing. But really it came from Dwight Eisenhower in a speech to the nation while he was president in the 50s. And that is a spirit, really, that America has embodied for many years, is that it's not the size of the fight. No, that's the opposite. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. And Angela Duckworth, this psychologist, before she became a psychologist, she was a middle school math teacher. And what she noticed was that the kids in her class who she expected to succeed, who she expected to do the best, they never did, actually. The ones who were the smartest, those were not the kids who at the end of the year had the highest grades or who even knew the most about math. The kids who were the smartest, who could immediately grasp a concept at the beginning of the year without any practice or tries, they were not the ones who did well. It was the kids who got it wrong the first time and got it wrong the second time and got it wrong the third time, but then finally got it right the next time. It was those kids who ended up knowing the most, having the highest grades, and being the most likely to succeed. And so later, after many years of observing this in the classroom, she decided to study this on an empirical level, meaning look at large quantities of people and see if this quality was something that some people have, if this quality was something that some people could develop, just sort of what was going on with this idea of grit. And what she found was some very interesting things. For example, West Point cadets, if you know the U.S. Military Academy in West Point, New York, it's one of the best, not just the best colleges in the world, but also it's, arguably the best, or one of them, training facilities for military officers in the world. The cadets who succeed at West Point, who graduate in the top of their class, they have to do a number of things right. They have to be good at academics. They have to be very smart. Almost all of them major in engineering. So they have to be very intelligent. They also have to be good at athletics. Every cadet must participate in athletics during their 4 years at the military academy, whether that's on a football team or intramural athletics or whatever. They have to be a successful athlete. They also have to be civically minded. That is, they have to get along well with their peers and do things that are good for the community. Anyway, long story short, it is not the people who come in with the highest test scores or the best athletes or the people who did the most student council in high school who do the best. It's people with grit. It's those people who never give up. Those are the people who graduate at the top of their class at West Point, one of the most rigorous places for education in the world. It also turns out that in a variety of other places, it's grit that matters a great deal. For example, some of you may have watched the Olympics this week. There's a lot going on. One Olympian in particular I think is very interesting. Her name is Katie Ledecky. If you've been following her swimming exploits, she really is pretty amazing. She won 2 days ago, I think she won the 800-meter freestyle, which is a swim that takes over 8 minutes. That's a long swim. Swimming as fast as you can for 8 minutes. Most of us, I would probably sink, I think, after swimming as fast as I could for about 2 minutes. She, by the end, had basically lapped the entire field. She was going in one direction, and everybody else hadn't yet touched the wall to go in the other direction. The thing about Katie Ledecky, first of all, she's only 19, so she's young. She actually won gold 4 years ago at the age of 15 in this same event, out of nowhere. She came from out of nowhere to do it. And so people wonder, how is it that she is so much better than everybody else? She has beat the world record by something like, she beat her own record by like 8 seconds in this particular event. She's beaten the world record by like 12 seconds, I think. And this in an event where people shave their entire bodies to save milliseconds. And she's winning by 12 seconds. That's how much faster she is than everybody else. And so people have wondered, why is it? How is it that she's so good? So they did an analysis at the Olympic Training Center about her body, because there are certain body characteristics that make swimmers really good. For example, having a long torso and short legs. That's Michael Phelps. I picture him kind of running around with just ankles. Long torso, short legs, and big hands. If you have like webbed fingers, that's ideal, you know, like a duck. That's not a thing. I made that part up, but it would be useful, I bet. But anyway, a slender body, too, helps you glide through the water quicker. And so people have thought, well, probably Katie Ledecky just is, from birth, she's just, you know, that much better than everybody else. The summary of the findings were that she is remarkably unremarkable. She is average in every way for a swimmer. So there's nothing about her that's any different than any of those other Olympians, other than grit. When you wake up every day at 4 a.m. to practice and practice and practice and practice and practice for your whole life. She started swimming at the age of 4 competitively. That is how you become an Olympian. Now, some people would never become an Olympian. You just literally, you know, you do not have the body type for it. Me, I would think. I'm very dense. Not a long distance swimmer at all. This year I did quite a bit of running. Found out that it doesn't matter how much I train, I will never be an Olympian. I mean, I like running, that's good, but never going to be an Olympian because my body type just isn't quite right. But I can outpace people who are similar to me by trying harder. And that's the thing, is that grit allows us to get through adversity. And grit, fortunately, is something that you can be born with, but it's also something that you can cultivate. So my older son, William, he was born with grit. You saw him running. He'll never stop running if other kids are running. His goal is just to beat everyone. I don't know where that came from. We trained him to be the opposite of that, if anything. Don't be so competitive. But that's just something he's born with. Our younger son, I think he'll end up much happier, because competing with people your whole life, not pleasant, I don't think. Younger son, Henry, doesn't have that. He'd be content to go over there and draw on that whiteboard for the entire service. But grit is something that you can cultivate, and grit in response to adversity is the way, I think personally, and the way that the research says, that we overcome it. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And so what we know, fortunately, from research, and this is where I'll finish up here, is that there are 5 things you can do to cultivate your grit. So my points today are simply this. Adversity is going to happen in your life. It will. Maybe it is right now. Your adversity is probably not going to be as bad as at least someone else on earth. That's point number 2. But that doesn't mean it's not real. It means that the world is broken, and if you can, try to fix it. And if you can't, work on your own stuff. And that's okay. We're going to face adversity. So is everybody else. And the more that we're there for each other, the better things are going to go. And so the third point is that we can grow our grit. And we can grow the way that we respond to adversity. And there are 5 things that Angela Duckworth's research suggests that we can do to really overcome the adversities that we know we're going to face, even if we're not facing them right now. The first thing that is really important for growing grit is pursue the things that interest you. So what I mean by that is, if you are facing adversity because you lost your job, what would interest me is getting a job at that point if I lose my job. That's obvious. The point is, sometimes it's going to be obvious what interests you, but what the research shows is that we need to go out and try stuff. If you are looking for a new job and you just sit in your house and you just imagine, what things might I like? What things might I like to do? Turns out that's not actually a good way to figure out what we like. It's not actually a good way to figure out what interests us. What works is go out and try stuff. And very quickly, you find out what you like and what you don't like. I don't know if you've had this experience. When I was in college, I thought maybe I would like to be a lawyer. I thought that for a long time. I went and I did an internship at a law firm, and I went and sat in court. Because you see court cases on TV, it's so interesting. I went and sat in court for 2 minutes, and I thought, I've made a terrible mistake. It was the most boring thing I'd ever done in my whole life. It was pews just like this, and just paperwork. That was the rest of it. And no offense to any lawyers out there, but it's not for me. And I learned that very quickly by doing it, even though I thought for a long time that I might really enjoy it. So the point is, go out and try stuff when you're facing adversity. That's the larger point. When you're facing adversity, try new things. Often we face adversity because the same old stuff that we've been working on, it's just not working anymore. And if we just keep beating our heads against that same wall, we're not going to break through the wall. We're going to break our heads. That's how walls work. So try new stuff, number 1. Number 2 is that once you find those things that you like, what works is deliberate practice. This is true for athletics, but it's also true for being nice to people. The best way to be nicer to people, if you've noticed that you've been angry with people around you, for example, the best way to not be angry with them is actually to be deliberate and intentional with being nice. And I just picked anger out of the air. It could be anything. The way that we get better at things is by being deliberate and intentional. Again, this is based on research. There's a guy named Anders Ericsson who found that among professionals who are at the top of their field in everything, anything, chess, athletics, sales, what makes people good is 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. That's when they get to be really, really good. 10,000 hours is for a frame of reference. Typically, someone who works 50 weeks a year for 40 hours a week, so typical work week, that's 2,000 hours. So that's 5 years of work to become an expert. And if you want to be an expert in being nice to people, that's a lot of work. Grit. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Is that worth it to you, that 10,000 hours of deliberate practice? Maybe not. And without number 3, which is having purpose, meaning, or calling, we probably will give up. And that's not like an insult or judging people. That's just how people work. If you don't have purpose, you don't have calling to do whatever it is that you're trying to do, it's just really hard. If you start a diet, for example, and you don't really believe in it, you just are kind of winging it and hoping that things are going to work, probably they're not, because you need to have purpose and calling. If your purpose, though, is to be healthy so that you can play with your kids or your grandkids, or to be healthy so that you can do an activity you enjoy, or so that you can feel good about yourself. Now, those are things that are purpose and calling based. And so the point is, again, once you find something you like, got to practice it. And once you start practicing, it's really hard to keep doing that unless you have a higher calling, higher purpose. So when you're thinking about the adversities you're facing, what's your calling? What's your purpose? These are things that people think long and hard about, and it's not something that you can necessarily solve right now. So I just encourage you, think about your purpose and your calling, because we have hope. And ironically, that's what the researchers have found, is that hope, for number 4, is very, very important. As Christians, we have an automatic source of hope that other people don't necessarily. And we can hope that even if we're facing terrible adversity, like Job, or like the kids who are harvesting our chocolate, or like us, even if we're facing those adversities, we know that God is working behind the scenes. We might never know what God is doing. We might never know why. That's irritating. But we know that God is back there doing something. And we have that hope. Without that hope, I would have very little purpose, I feel, just in general, in doing anything. So we have hope. And the last one, and this one I think is the most important, that the research has found, number 5, is find a gritty group. So if you are with people who are also doing these things, it's just so much easier to be part of something bigger than yourself. And so that is what I hope you take away from this today, is that when you face adversity, be together. So you're bored over here. That's a way to be together. You see those things up there. You see names. You see problems. You see answered prayers. And being a gritty group makes all those other things easier when you face adversity. And so being together, I think, is more important than anything that you can do any other time. And so this leads nicely. I didn't know there was communion today, but this leads nicely into communion, because that's what communion is. It is being together and celebrating what Christ did for us. So thank you.
Only once in a great while will we get applause, and that's really good. It's interesting that Matt came back from the I said, we were texting back and forth, and he just said it was just such an awesome experience. And the only word that he continued to use when we actually were together talking was community, right? Community, sharing, getting together, sharing problems, solutions to those problems. And probably the other big takeaway that I just took from that was enough of the Christianese, or, God doesn't give me more than you can handle, or, he's got a bigger purpose for this. That is so easy to say, but so meaningless most of the time. People do not need to hear that kind of stuff at those times. And maybe when they see the bigger purpose, they can understand that, but not at that time. That's so important. And when I thought about communion today, I also didn't know it was communion today. We never did the second week. So we were all caught by surprise, actually. I wasn't here last week. But it's not, when we take communion, it's not, God, what can you do for me? I think that's so often why a lot of us talk about why we should have a relationship with Christ, because he can just do all these things for you. Just give tithe, because you're going to be just blessed beyond measure. And then we have Christians who give tithe and start to check their mailbox, all for the wrong reasons. Communion, of all things, is the very opposite of that. Of God, what can you do for me? It's God, I'm going to do this because of what you have already done for me. And we talk all the time how communion should not be a ritual in any capacity. If it is, you're simply taking juice and bread and digesting them, and that's all you're doing. It's not a ritual. It is truly a remembrance of what Christ has done for us. Anyone who does this on a regular basis should not need to be a member of any church other than his church, and you believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for us, and on the night Jesus was betrayed, he took the juice and he said, "This is my blood. Take this in remembrance of me." And he took the bread and broke it. He said, "This is my body. Take this in remembrance of me." And it's just so easy to get in the habit of doing things, just like saying things, just doing things because this is what we do. I'm glad we're doing it on the second of the month because it is different. And don't get in those habits, especially on something like this. Don't take communion just because you've taken it for the last 30 years. Take it because Christ did something special in your life. And regardless of your problems, he's still here. And he is still in control. We don't know what kind of control he's taking or when he's going to do it, but he's in control. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for everyone here today. I thank you that we have the ability to partake of your body, your blood. You did something very, very special 2,000 years ago. That you gave the ultimate sacrifice. You gave your life so that we may have life and life more abundantly. In whatever capacity that means. But ultimately, that we have eternal life. And I thank you, Lord, that we do not take this life lightly. That we would search our hearts. That we would ask for forgiveness. That we would come to you and say, Lord, I am a broken individual. And only because of what you've done may I move forward. And I pray that none of us would ever take for granted what you've truly done for our lives. Lord, I pray.
King of my life, I crown thee now. Thine shall the glory be. Lest I forget thy thorn crown brown, lead me to Calvary. Lest I forget Gethsemane, lest I forget thine agony, lest I forget thy love for me, lead me to Calvary. Lest I forget Gethsemane, lest I forget thine agony, lest I forget thy love for me, lead me to Calvary. At the cross, where I first saw thine, and the burden of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. Alas, and did our Savior bleed, and did our sovereign die? Evil and sacred end for such a one as I. At the cross, where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away.
you are. Thank you for the message today, for worship. And I just pray that when we leave here today, we can continue to press forward and fight the good fight of faith. In your name we pray, and everyone said, Amen.